You're listening to Unmuted Love. Hi there, I'm C. Ushelman, and with 35 years as a marriage and family therapist and 25 years as a parent of 2 children I brought home from the foster care system, I want to welcome you here to Unmuted Love Podcast, the one place where nothing is off limits to say out loud about parenting children from difficult beginnings.
Stop for a minute, stop and breathe for a minute. Long it over your head, try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute, who you wanna be for a minute. Don't get over your head, you're like everyone else, aren't you?
Sometimes it's real sweet around here, and sometimes it ain't so pretty, because this is 100% Unmuted Love. So let's go.
You'll be just
Hey parents, this is C. Get the help you need to end destructive and chaotic behavior in your home while parenting children from difficult beginnings. I know you need help, and the Love Plus parenting model actually works. I'm inviting you to work with me personally for 6 months in my virtual therapeutic parent program, and I guarantee you results, or 100% of your investment back. How is that for a blue ribbon deal? I'm looking forward to working with you. See you on the inside. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy you're joining us today. I'm excited to share with you a person that I met along the way, and she has a wonderful story, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. Welcome, Amanda Molinar, to Unmuted Love. So let's just get started by you saying a little bit about what we talked about and what made you want to come talk to my audience here on Unmuted Love.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for inviting me to your show. I think it's very special that you make space for these kind of stories, and I'm really honored to share mine. My name is Amanda Molenaar. I'm currently 36, but when I was a teenager, I lived with 2 foster families from age 15 till 18 and a half till I went to university. And these foster families were firstly my aunt and uncle and their 2 sons, and then also another family who were previous acquaintances of my parents. And I still occasionally hung out with their daughter. And the reason for that was that both my parents really couldn't take care of me and my sister. My parents were alcoholics. First my mom, and then they divorced. And then when we stayed with our dad, he also started drinking more. And this was not sustainable. I couldn't live at home anymore. And so this is when I moved out first, and later my sister as well, to these foster families. Yeah, it has really impacted me still as an adult as well. I'm also very proud of my story. And I'm very happy to share a little bit more with you today.
You're different than the usual folks that we interview because you came into foster care later in life. Not that you had a particularly stable biological family experience, right?
Yeah.
But you came into foster care later. But when we were speaking, you were like, and, it really impacted me. I think it's important for listeners to hear that no matter when your attachment gets disrupted, and even when your attachment is with people who love you but who are not very stable for you, that there are consequences all the way through your life. I so want people to really understand the impact of trauma, and that there's no little breach in attachment. There's no, oh, she was only in foster care for 3 years. Big deal. It is a big deal, right? To the person.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about that. So I was already a teenager, and having gone through trauma, I think from age 6 or so, or 5, I'm not really sure because I forgot most of my memories, as often happens. But there was a lot going on in my early years. My mom went to rehab. She left the house very often. My parents got divorced. There was violence also. And then later we stayed with my dad, and that also wasn't stable because he would drink quite a lot, but we never knew why. We couldn't, or at least me, I couldn't really anticipate it. So the household was always full of stress and unpredictability. So that generated also stress within me, in my body, in how I think and how I live. But the foster care experience also impacted me. So I was already like a teenager, having gone through quite a few things. I was a lot more mature, I think, than most people of my age. And then I moved in with my aunt and uncle, who were a biological family and very loving and very kind. And they were the family I felt most with. I was most similar to them, I guess. But still, it was a very different family from my own parents and how I grew up. So firstly, the positive things, there was stability, obviously, rules that were really good for me. At the time, I didn't really feel that, but in hindsight, I really do feel feel that. There was a lot of attention, which was really good. But also their way of communicating with each other was different. Yeah, it's just so many things were different, like daily routines as well. And then later, when I moved to yet another family, which was very different from my own family, I had to adapt to a whole new household again. And I think this is how it has impacted me the most, is that I learned to adapt to other people all the time at this pretty forming age still. And so I learned to read the room. I learned to assess, okay, how are things being done there? And what do I need to do to fit in here? Because I need to fit in. I need to adapt myself, not them. I still do that. I still have a gift, I think, for reading the room and feeling, the vibe somewhere, or if someone is going through something. I also still have a tendency, not very often, but in really close relationships, like romantic relationships, to adjust myself in order to stay with the person. It has gifted me something as well, because I was a diplomat for 7 years. I lived abroad many times, not only as a diplomat, but also in other roles. And this is also when you need to adapt to another country and to fit in a role all the time. So it has also brought me something. It isn't just bad all the time, but it definitely impacted me in that I think my core response is to read the other person or the room, the family, and to then adapt to what is necessary to fit in. I'm not sure, but I guess a lot of foster children have this, and maybe only the ones who get foster care at a later age or who move around a lot. I don't know. But you learn to adjust yourself, and that has really impacted me.
Yeah, so what I love about you is how even when you were just now you were talking about there were some positive things too, and I'm thinking, well, where did you say the negative things? And you said the
Yeah.
negative things in such a positive light, which of course it says a lot about your growth mindset now, but also the reality that trauma isn't always bad, that it of course has a bad side, but it also has a flip side to it, right? Post traumatic growth, we call it. The growth is that there are strengths that come from challenges in childhood, and resilience comes from it. And even something like, now that I'm thinking about what you said, I mean, I do know that it's not super positive to conform yourself into somebody else's box in order to get them to love you or in order to keep them happy, or to think you have
Hmm.
to do that, right? So I know that it's negative, but you said it in, maybe it's your voice, I don't know. You have that, beautiful voice that probably makes everything sound pretty good.
I mean it. I mean it.
But I can see it in your face. My listeners can't see your face, but I'm looking at you and I just see the beauty that you have, and what shines through is your growth mindset. So my curiosity then is, when did you get that? Did you have that all along? Do you think it's your temperament? Do you think there was something that happened in all this process that had
Yeah.
that bloom for you? Because of
Yeah.
course, we have kids who come from difficult beginnings now. What could we do, to foster that if
Yeah.
it came somewhere in childhood? I don't know.
Yeah, well, beautiful question, and thank you also for seeing that in me. Yeah, I think when I was growing up and going through, to these foster families, a lot of people told me, like, when they heard my story, they said, "Oh, but you're so normal." And I always shrug my shoulders. I'm like, "Yeah, of course I am." Like, I didn't think my story was very special. I mean, I knew it wasn't conventional, but I didn't think it was so fantastic, or it was really an achievement of how I was living my life. Because as a kid, those things are normal to you when you grow up in trauma. At some point in my early 20s, I was going through a tougher time, because then I was dealing with a lot more emotions, and the relationship with my parents was still pretty difficult. And rationally, I could always tell why I was a certain way and how it had shaped me, but I still had a hard time really feeling it and really accepting everything that happened to me on an emotional level. So rationally, I was there already, but emotionally and in my body, I wasn't there yet. And everything changed when I started doing inner work. So I did a lot of coaching, I did some body therapies. And I think the final piece of it all, the final piece of the puzzle, was in the last couple of years after I returned home from Brazil, where I was living as a diplomat. Both my parents passed away within 2 years of each other. And that had also a very profound effect on me. And I think this is really when I started to accept on an emotional level everything that happened to me. It was also the pandemic. I couldn't go anywhere. I was dealing with all this grief. And I really had no choice than to sit with my emotions. So what I had done before was always literally running away, like going off to another country. Whenever I got bored or a little bit depressed or I just didn't feel it, I would book a ticket to a nice country. And this time I couldn't. And so it was very hard during that time. But again, in hindsight, I'm really glad that it happened to me, because it really felt like the final piece of the puzzle, and it all came together, that I could really accept everything on all these levels. And to answer your question, like, I think, the positivity, and especially positivity, was always there. I think having had that example of both my parents be in a bad place really set the bar, like, okay, I'm never going to go there. This is not happening to me. And having had that experience with caring foster families in these final years as a child was really helpful also to see, hey, this is another way how it can be. So I think those two combined already gave that positive mindset. But I think what really unlocked me and how I am right now is really accepting it at an emotional level and not hiding from it or not running away from it. I think that what you saw in my face is like a full acceptance of myself. I'm not ashamed of my story at all. I never really was, but now I'm also not afraid of the emotions and how it may still impact me in relationships sometimes or in my career. I just really accept myself how I am, and that has lifted a lot of weight off my shoulders. Emotions that I was subconsciously trying to suppress, I no longer need to do that. And I think for foster families who are taking care of a child who has gone through trauma, I think this is the main thing too, just help them accepting their story, not just through words and talking, but also in, just physically give them a hug or put a hand on their back sometimes for support. And whenever they're emotional, make space for that their emotions are totally acceptable. I think this is really important what you can do as a foster family, to just show, hey, whatever you bring here to this place, we accept it, and there's space for it here.
So I really appreciate that worldview on accepting emotions as they are. And I think you were a little bit different, because it doesn't sound to me like when you went into foster care, you didn't resist the love that your aunt and uncle had for you. It doesn't sound like. Now, maybe you did and you didn't share that. But a lot of children who come into homes from foster care are younger, very wounded. They've been harmed by abuse and abandonment, which I think you were as well.
Yeah.
But when they come into a loving home, they tend to reject it, push it away, not trust it, not want it. And that persists for a very long time. And
Yeah.
what often happens is then behavior comes up in that, right? The behavior of resistance, which looks like opposition. It looks like anger. It looks like aggression. It can look like dismissiveness, disinterest, lack of love, inability to love. It can look like a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
A family who's just trying to love this child may respond in a traditional parenting approach, right? Which is to try and shape it out of the child, right? It's like, oh, these emotions are too big. You don't have any reason to have these big emotions here, because I'm just telling you can't have a cookie. And you're acting like I'm telling you you're never going to ever get a cookie again in your whole life. And that's not okay, right? There's a lot of that's not okay. And then what happens is traditional parenting comes in, like anger from the parent to the child, or consequences come in, like, I'm going to consequence this out of you if you're going to keep throwing these fits and these tantrums. And so then traditional parenting meets these big feelings and a little acceptance some of the time, but then it wears thin, right? Then it's like, oh, I'm so over this. And then parents just go back to what they know, how they were raised, and they tend to go back into traditional parenting, which creates unfelt safety, right? And it takes away any possible safety that might have been there, disappears for the child. So I'm preaching to the choir here, because I can tell from your facial expressions that you know what I'm talking about. But I spend a lot of time literally trying to convince parents that therapeutic parenting, which is what you're talking about, right? Radical acceptance of the emotions of the child, which is also significantly difficult to do, which is why I exist, right? To help people, to support them while they learn how to do it. Speak to that, because I see that you have some agreement with it.
Yeah, so I want to say that actually I never have gone through what you just described. I think I was a really easy kid, because I learned to behave correctly. I learned to not take not a lot of space. I learned to not make mistakes, because whenever I did that as a young child, one of my parents would probably explode or react to that. So I think I was a very reasonable kid. I do remember there were some things that I expressed quite a bit of emotion for who I was at the time. And now I remember that, yes, my foster families responded to it with their traditional parenting. Now I remember that you bring it in this framework. I'm like, oh yeah, this also happened. But it wasn't anything big. I didn't have those really big emotions about a cookie, for example. Probably also because I was a teenager already. But yeah, I mean, I can only imagine from both sides that as a foster family, foster parents, you want to help someone, you want to help the kid, and you do it with what you know. In their eyes, it makes total sense. But from the perspective from the foster child, they need something else probably. So I think my only tip for foster parents, but I don't have kids myself, I've never been in that position, is to zoom out from your own perspective for a moment and to assess it from their eyes. Literally visualize it if that helps, like try to get out of your logical thinking, close your eyes and visualize it from a helicopter perspective or from the kid who walks into that room and brings all that luggage, and then he or she meets you and there is some conflict going on. So what can you do for that child? I think this could be helpful.
Well, so I love that idea of zooming out, right? So sometimes I talk about it like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, like have 1 foot in, but have 1 foot out so you can know what's really happening. There's what's going
Yeah.
on around the cookie is a thing, but what's going around really about the cookie is something way bigger and different. And so,
Yes. Yes.
so if you can zoom out with 1 foot, one part of your
Yeah.
brain and go, oh, okay, this isn't about the cookie, right? This is about something else. And really,
Yeah.
but it's so persistent and constant that it's very hard to do that kind of zooming out, like on
Yeah.
a minute by minute basis every day, day in and day out, right? So it's really important for foster families, for adoptive families, and for biological families where the children have experienced trauma to
Yeah.
understand that they need support to do that, right? It's really hard to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how it is in the States or wherever the listeners are listening from. In the Netherlands, we get support from the state, and both my foster families had that. We always thought that the support was a bit, not really necessary or the right support for us. Actually, in fact, one of the people from that support team who was on my case, when I went to university, she told me that I was her first foster child who ever made it to university. And I was like, wow, because to me that is so normal. Well, I was following the normal lines of any child in my environment, but it opened my eyes to hear like, okay, there are children who are not succeeding there. And so what I wanted to say with that is that we got some support, but also both my foster families, whenever I lived them once a month for a weekend, I went away either to the other foster family or to my father so that they could have some free time and some time alone with their poor family. And while I totally understand that from the foster family side, I think it's good to recharge your battery. For me as a child, I was reflecting on this, I think a couple of weeks ago. It has also impacted me because I always felt like I am not entirely part of it.
Mhm.
So I will always have 1 foot in, 1 foot out, the same analogy. Yeah, I think it's important to take care of yourself also as the foster parents, to recharge your own batteries and to seek support, either in like practical support, but also to find that emotional relief. Because like you said, I think it's really hard to hold that space for the child every single day with all these big emotions that come up. You also have to deal with your own emotions and your own reaction to it. So try to find something that you can create space for yourself to recharge your batteries as well.
Hearing from your perspective helps us parents have perspective, right? It's like, for example, from the parent's point of view, if I would go away for a weekend to recharge my batteries and come back, the children were just like off the hook, right? They were
Yeah.
3 times worse than when I left in terms of behavior. And then it would make going somewhere feel terrible because coming back was so terrible. But for the longest time, I really wasn't able, I was just angry that when I came back, it was worse, because it makes you dread coming home or makes you
Yeah.
dread going away. But when I think about it, like hearing you talk about having that happen where you're sent away or where someone leaves you to recharge, it's like you're the problem. You don't fit in. It's actually
Yeah.
that you're left out, right? And that something, right? There's just something left from that.
Yeah.
So can you say just a
100%. Yeah.
teeny bit more about maybe what you thought and what your feelings were?
Yeah, so I think at the time, rationally, I understood it because, yeah, I could totally understand why, because they explained it to me and it was a very clear structure and the support team, was also on board of it. So rationally, I could accept it. And I think at the moment, I wasn't feeling so much. It's really hard for me to go back to my feelings as a child because I have a tendency to forget or erase my memories. First of all, I think I just pushed it away. I kind of shrugged my shoulders and I'm like, okay, that's it. But I always felt a bit like, yeah, I don't want to go a weekend to my father because it isn't nice there. This isn't a good environment for me. My dad occasionally was good and then we had fun, but there were times that he was drinking again. And so I think I couldn't fully understand why I had to do it. I mean, from their perspective, I could understand. But really from my heart speaking, it was a bit like, okay, yeah, okay, I'm not a full member of this family. And to be honest, I think, not sure if this is the root of it or earlier experiences with my biological parents, but I still to this day have, especially like when a relationships enter something, my first reaction is, I don't belong here. I cannot be part of it. So I think it has definitely left some impact still on me as an adult.
Yeah, so like a piece of abandonment, even though it's just a weekend away, a piece of just not fitting in and being abandoned for just a moment, but it's enough to just
Yeah.
throw you like you don't belong. And after a while, it
Yeah.
feels like anywhere, right? It could feel like anywhere. Or when's it
Yeah.
going to happen when suddenly I don't belong anymore?
Yeah. I have it mostly with my real close relationships where when I'm in a relationship with someone, they introduce me to their world. And when they break up with me, I can no longer be part of their world. And so I think that definitely has to do something with those weekends away that I got sent away. And maybe also the root is a bit deeper when I was a really young child and my mom went to rehab every now and then. And I didn't understand that as a child. So I think the real root is there, but maybe it got repeated in my teenage years.
Yeah, for sure. For sure that
Yeah.
happened. I'm sure of that. So one of the things that when you were speaking earlier, I realized is that you are the pic. So I described the one picture of a child's response to coming into a family that they don't know yet. They tend to push it away, and the behaviors are very big and they're very obvious, right? So those children get a lot of focus and a lot of attention. But
Yeah.
you're the child that we don't hear about very much. You don't come into the
Yeah.
system in the same way. You're the quiet, fit in child. You're
Yeah.
the child that's more withdrawn in a way, even if you weren't acting withdrawn. You're more internalized. You're not expressing externally your feelings. You're just trying to go along, get along, and not be abandoned again. Not,
Yeah.
fit in. I think I want to highlight that a little bit because there is this notion that some people got lucky with the kids that they adopted because they have your temperament and how you responded to it. And then they have a tendency, we parents have a tendency to think, oh, I got lucky and nothing's wrong, right? Like my child wasn't impacted by any of that because look
Yeah.
how well she behaves and she goes to university and she's doing fine and she's not impacted really hardly at all. Consequently, maybe you don't get seen, and no one brings you out or even helps you see that what might persist into adulthood and to help you kind of correct that early.
Yeah. Actually, when you mentioned it about the responses that children have, I was thinking about it and I thought, yeah, I retreat, I withdraw. And so you saw that very correctly. And I did that as a foster child as well. Like sometimes I would go to bed without even saying goodnight, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a very extroverted person, so it's not in my nature anyway to be, all the time with people. But looking back, I was on my own and doing my own thing and minding my own business quite a lot. Yeah, maybe there is some luck because it can be easier for the parents, to deal with it. I think it's easier than to deal with the really big emotions. But under the surface, yeah, there is more going on that the child may not be aware of at the time. If you see a child as withdrawing themselves, like try to reach out and I think it's most important to just create an environment where they know they are very welcome whenever they want to reach out. My second foster family, I think it helped that the mom, when she was young, her parents also took in someone for a year or so. So I think she already had some experience that she brought in, but the family was incredibly warm. So even though it wasn't my biological family, they always made me feel I was part of their family from day one. So the dad always said, oh, my daughters, and he actually had daughters from another marriage as well. So we were all this like really interesting collective together. And they always made me feel part of the family. It was a very warm environment. And so it felt like there wasn't such a big distinction between biological kids and foster kids. So I think that also really helped and allowed me to engage a bit more with that.
Right. And so it's important for us as parents to realize that we can go a long way toward mending some of that by really being super inclusive and not singling out the bigness of some of the behaviors or the bigness of some of the withdrawal. And instead just see it as this is part of our family. Everybody's different in our family, and that's good. That's a good thing. We address each person based on what their needs are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Instead of you've messed up our family now.
Yeah.
You've come into our family and you've messed it up.
Yeah.
which of course is not true, but it feels like it, it can feel like
Yeah,
it.
I definitely felt for me a couple of times. I heard some remarks and I was like, oh, but this wasn't my choice either.
Right,
And I know,
exactly.
like, I can, as an adult and also as a teenager, I can totally see it from their perspective and I totally understand their point of view as well. But you just have a different perspective as a child going in there.
Right. So let me
Yeah.
ask you about the body stuff you were talking about earlier. So the
Yeah.
work you did on yourself later in life was around your body. And so one of the things I know is that trauma, and you had early trauma, right? Your
Yeah.
parents were not, it's not like they were great, great, great secure parents
No,
and then you went into foster care, right?
no, yeah, no.
So I'm just curious to know if you have awareness now. I know you're not a therapist and this isn't, you don't work in this field or anything, so this may be news to you, but like there's wiring in the brain that's connected to your mind body complex, right? And
Yeah.
trauma actually reorganizes your nervous system and so it becomes hardwired. And I'm just curious if you feel like you had any of that or if not. I don't know.
100%, yes. So I'm now a life coach. I used to be a diplomat and now I'm a life coach. So I also work with these topics, although I'm definitely not an expert on trauma or therapy, that kind of stuff. But for sure, like I have had it got less, but I used to have a very strong fear of abandonment, and especially in my romantic relationships. And I feel that right away in my body. So my stomach all gets messed up. I get really nauseous, and I feel like I cannot breathe. Like my throat, it just, and my chest, I feel I cannot breathe anymore. And so now I can recognize it and I'm like, okay, it's just my body responding to an echo from the past. That's all.
Mhm.
But definitely I can feel that. And even I think I have it strong. I'm super confident now, but in groups I get very shy and I get super nervous when all eyes are on me, because as a child I learned that it's better to not cause any trouble because there's already so much going on here. And so whenever all the eyes are on me, I also feel it in my body. Now, I know a lot of people have this when they have to speak in front of an audience, but I'm even still afraid to raise my hand and ask a question. So even thinking about it already, accelerates my heart rate and I start to sweat and I get very red. So I know it's still in my body as well. But yeah, mostly the fear of abandonment, I think, is strongly present. I think I also have I have a fear of not being good enough. And I can feel that as well in my body because there's a lot more tension when that comes up. And I store it in my jaws and I feel it in my body, basically.
Mhm.
So every time I recognize that, learning how I respond physically to things has helped me to recognize whenever one of these fears is playing up for me.
Amanda, you're so open. I'm loving talking with you. I'm loving
Thank
hearing you little by little take us a little deeper into the experience that you had. I mean, it's not
you. Mhm.
easy to do, and you're so open about it. I'm really appreciative and feel like, oh, this is what I need to hear. I need to hear from someone who can articulate it. A lot of times our children grow up and they were so harmed that they can't even articulate really what
Yeah.
happened and what's going on even now. And so it's really nice to actually have someone who has taken some time, because of your experience to really look at how it impacted you and to have
Yeah.
pulled out the strengths, from it. I'm impressed by the strengths that you pulled out of it, right? Being a
Thank you.
diplomat and now a life coach and all of that is really lovely. And I'm so pleased to hear that you are successful and that you are able to move forward. I also really appreciate the ongoing struggle with abandonment. I think that that's probably the number one issue in most parent-child relationships when there has been trauma is that
Yeah.
not getting that cookie feels like I'm going to die if I don't get my needs met, right? Because that's like
Yeah.
being abandoned. And
Yeah.
that feeling you get really described very well what it feels like, right? To be abandoned, it's like you're going to die. And that's what early abandonment feels like. You're a baby, you're going to die if somebody doesn't come take care of you. And so
Yeah.
it just, replicates over and over, right? And it start in these families, right? In our families, my family, it starts like cookies. It just gets like, and now it's cars, and now it's, like it just goes on. But if we could understand it from the perspective of what we started with, which is kind of radical acceptance of the emotions and really get that it has nothing to do with us and it has everything to do with us in that we can help heal it by being as loving as your foster families were. I realized that the first family you were in was still biological, but here in the United States in particular, it's more like a job. And so sometimes people get tired of their jobs, in any kind of job. And so if a foster family gets tired of their job, then it might be very hard for them to give the level of acceptance and positive regard necessary, right? So,
Yeah.
just being aware of that and realizing that you need breaks from it and you need self-care and you have to always have one foot out, with that zoom out look,
Yeah. Yeah.
even on your worst day, right?
Yeah.
Which actually, it asks for a lot. It asks for a lot from all of us, right? And humans, though,
Yeah.
can do it. We can do it if we have the right mindset. And that's to me one of the most precious things that you bring forward here is that you have shaped your mindset in this very positive orientation. It really shows. And I think if we can actually learn from you that mindset can start very early in the foster families or in the adoptive families with being more accepting and more open and to grow and learn from what we're seeing rather than to want to prune it back and shut it down and make it go away because it doesn't fit our expectation. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what you do now and share it with folks. We always want to support our foster kids.
That's very nice to hear. And thank you again for this opportunity and your beautiful summary of it. So yeah, I'm a life coach now for high achieving expats. And I was a high achieving expat myself, very rational and always, I made things happen and I got results in happily living my global life. But I wasn't fully aware of all my emotions and all the luggage I was bringing with me to all these countries. And now I help other globetrotters to have their own radical acceptance of who they really are, so they can really live a life that they feel truly happy and fulfilled in, and that they can create a home within themselves. And this is really important to me because, I moved around so much, not only as a foster child, but also in my adult life, every 1-2 years or so. Definitely also something that I brought with me from my childhood. And what I've come to learn is that having that inner home is crucial to feeling good and to feeling steady within yourself. And so now I help others to assess their emotions, their patterns, their mindset, things that they learned subconsciously in their childhood, to really have real personal success in their lives wherever they go. And if someone is listening and feels like, oh, I could use that because I am internationally oriented and I would love to have experiences as well, they can go to my website, amandamaxinecoaching.com, and book a free discovery call with me.
I love that. I love it so much. Thank you so much for being here. You've brought such a light to Unmuted Love. Sometimes we can get a little heavy around here. And today I feel like it's full of light and joy. So thank you so much. And I'll look forward to maybe bumping into you in the expat world. That would be fun for me. You are my sort of mirror fantasy life. Like I want to be you when I grow up.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. Well, thank you again for this opportunity, for being able to share my story with you. And I look forward to seeing you somewhere in this world.
Yes.
Thank you.
Big success to you.
Stop for a minute. Stop and breathe for a minute. Long it over your head. Try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute. Who you want to be for a minute. Don't get over your head. You're like everyone else, aren't you? You could gain from being a bit nicer. Know when to talk and when to shut your mouth.
The Unmuted Love podcast is hosted by me, C. Eshelman, attachment and trauma specialist at the Attach Place in Sacramento, California. Our podcast producer is the amazing Saya Clark, and our theme song is Nicer by Houses on the Hill, licensed through Epidemic Sound. Thank you for being such loyal listeners here on Unmuted Love. I'll see you all next week.
You'll be just fine.